Vanessa Taylor's face turned pale as she recognized the man boarding first-class Dominic Wilson, the owner of Celestial Airways. Just hours earlier, she had denied his 6-year-old daughter a blanket, claiming they were reserved for premium passengers. Their eyes met. The moment of recognition was unmistakable. Before we dive into this eye-opening story, where are you watching from today? If you're ready to witness justice delivered in the most unexpected way, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories of accountability and truth. Let's rewind to how it all began. The day had started like any other for 6-year-old Zoe Wilson, wide-eyed and full of wonder. She tightly clutched her favorite stuffed elephant as she boarded Celestial Airways Flight 237 from New York to San Francisco. By her side was Sandra Johnson, her caring nanny in her late 50s, with silky hair and gentle eyes. Hand in hand, they made their way down the crowded aisle to their seats in economy class. "Is Daddy going to be at the airport?" Zoe asked excitedly. She hadn't seen him in nearly 2 weeks. "Yes, sweetheart," Sandra replied with a warm smile. "He just finished his big meeting and said he'll be there with your favorite ice cream." Dominic Wilson, 45, was a successful tech billionaire and a devoted single father. Since losing his wife Amanda to cancer 3 years ago, Zoe had become the center of his world. As they settled in, Zoe looked around in awe. This was only her 3rd time flying, and everything still felt magical. But soon, she began to shiver. "The air feels funny," she said, rubbing her arms. Sandra noticed it, too. The cabin was unusually cold, with the air conditioning blasting despite the mild spring weather outside. Concerned, Sandra pressed the call button as a flight attendant passed. Vanessa Taylor, a senior flight attendant with 15 years of experience at Celestial Airways, walked briskly down the aisle. At 38, she carried herself with confidence and authority. Her uniform was crisp, her hair perfectly styled, and her expression unreadable. "Excuse me," Sandra said politely. "Would it be possible to get a blanket for my little one? She's quite cold." Vanessa stopped and looked down, quickly assessing Sandra's modest attire, and then Zoe's dark skin and curly hair. Her face tightened. "I'm sorry," she replied, her voice devoid of warmth. "Blankets are reserved for premium passengers only." She gestured toward the front of the plane. Sandra frowned. "But she's just a child, and she's cold." Zoe clutched her elephant tighter. "Please, Ellie's cold too," she whispered. Vanessa's tone hardened. "That's the airline's policy. We must prioritize amenities for premium passengers." This, despite a visible stack of unused blankets in the overhead compartment nearby. "I've flown with Celestial many times," Sandra said, more firmly. "I've never heard of such a policy." Vanessa offered a condescending smile. "Then, perhaps next time, you should consider upgrading if comfort is a concern. It's important for children to learn that certain privileges are earned or paid for. That's how the world works." A hush fell over the surrounding rows. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some exchanging uneasy glances. But no one spoken till a voice called from across the aisle. "Excuse me," said Blake Richardson, a middle-aged white man in a business suit. "May I have a blanket?" Vanessa turned to him, her demeanor instantly transforming. A warm smile lit up her face. "Of course, sir, right away." She retrieved a blanket from the very same compartment and handed it to him with care. "Please don't hesitate if you need anything else." The contrast was jarring. Zoe watched, her small face crumpling in confusion as Blake unfolded his blanket. "Why did he get one?" she asked softly. Sandra's jaw clenched, but she stayed calm for Zoe's sake. Silently, she reached for her phone and began recording, capturing Vanessa walking away. Then panning to show the man across the aisle, now comfortably wrapped in a blanket. "It's not right," murmured an elderly woman sitting behind them. "That little girl should have a blanket too." Sandra nodded, but turned her focus back to comforting Zoe. "Sometimes, sweetheart," she said gently, brushing a curl from the girl's forehead. People don't treat others the way they should, but that doesn't mean we stay silent. Do people treat others differently because of how they look? Zoe asked, her voice soft but piercingly direct. Sandra hesitated, then gave a quiet, sad nod. Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes, because of that. Because I'm brown? Zoe asked, her eyes wide, confusion and hurt clouding the innocence in her gaze. Sandra's heart ached. She looked into those eyes so full of questions a child should never have to ask. Hand nodded again. Yes, sometimes. But that's not because of you, baby. That says everything about them, and nothing about you. You are perfect, exactly as you are. She gently pulled Zoe closer, wrapping her own light jacket around the shivering girl. Vanessa had disappeared into the front cabin, unaware that her moment of quiet cruelty was now captured on Sandra's phone and on its way to someone who would not let it go unanswered. Sandra tapped out a quick, detailed message to Dominic Wilson and attached the video. Zoe, subdued and quiet, leaned into her. The thrill of the trip was gone. She had grown up a little in those few minutes, forced to confront an unspoken truth far too soon. She had always known warmth, love, and belonging in her father's world, but this was new, unjust, and deeply unsettling. Sandra held her tighter. Your daddy will make this right, she whispered. He always does. What no one on board knew not, even Vanessa Taylor, was that the man Zoe was flying to see was Dominic Wilson. The man who signed her paychecks. The man who, until now, had stayed quietly in the background after acquiring Celestial Airways. He hadn't made his ownership public, choosing instead to observe the company's culture before initiating change. But now, his daughter had just given him an unfiltered glimpse of how deep the rot ran. As the plane finally lifted off, Zoe curled into Sandra's side, still trembling from the chill in the cabin. A soft buzz broke the silence. Sandra's phone lit up with a reply from Dominic. I'm handling this personally. Dominic Wilson didn't come from generational wealth. Born in Chicago to a middle-class family, his father taught community college math. His mother worked as a nurse. They raised him to value education, integrity, and resilience. From a young age, he excelled in technology. At 12, he built his first computer from spare parts. At 16, he developed a software tool to help his dad grade exams. By 19, he launched his first startup from his college dorm. Today, at 45, he was the CEO of DW Technologies and one of the most influential black entrepreneurs in America. 2 years ago, he acquired Celestial Airways, his first major investment outside tech. He believed in its potential, not just to be profitable, but to set new standards for equity and inclusion in an industry notorious for its lack of both. He had introduced inclusive hiring practices, updated training programs, and created scholarship funds for underrepresented groups in aviation. The numbers had improved. The culture, clearly it had not caught up, and now, his own daughter had paid the price. Dominic had always known that success wouldn't protect him or her from racism. He still remembered the banking conference where he'd been asked to refill coffee. The luxury real estate agent who wouldn't return his calls. Until a white assistant inquired and was instantly accommodated. The high-end department store where security trailed him, even in a $5,000 suit. Worst of all was the board meeting years ago when a fellow executive, not recognizing him, asked if he could grab coffee before Mr. Wilson arrives. That man's face, when he realized he was speaking to Dominic Wilson himself, still lingered in Dominic's mind, half shock, half shame. He had channeled that pain into progress, into building a legacy, into protecting his daughter from the world's harsher truths. But after Amanda's passing, that mission became deeply personal. Amanda, his wife, his partner in life and business, had made him promise one thing before she died of cancer: build a better world for her. And so he had. Every decision he made, every investment, every policy was filtered through one question. Would this make Zoe's world better? Would it give her the dignity, respect, and opportunities she deserved without her having to fight for them? Clearly, more work remained. Sandra had been Amanda's childhood friend before becoming Zoe's nanny. After Amanda's death, her presence became irreplaceable, part caregiver, part mentor, part mother figure. She understood what it meant to raise a black child in America, and she helped Zoe navigate it with love and awareness. Dominic's latest project, revamping Celestial's customer service to emphasize equity and empathy, was still in early phases. Ironically, his own daughter had just become a test case for why it was urgently needed. When Sandra's video arrived, Dominic was in a high-level strategy meeting. He stepped out to watch it in private. As the footage played, his expression darkened. Vanessa's tone, her dismissive glance, her condescending lecture, it was all too familiar, too painful. This wasn't just about Zoe anymore. It was about every child, every parent, every traveler who had ever been made to feel less than. He canceled his remaining meetings rather than sending his driver to greet Zoe and Sandra. Dominic headed to the airport himself, and the next day, he would take the same return flight to New York, with the same crew, including one Vanessa Taylor. Before leaving the office, he turned to his assistant. "Pull up everything we have on customer service training," he said calmly, "and I want Vanessa Taylor's full personnel file on my desk by morning." On the drive to San Francisco International, his phone buzzed again. The assistant had already found several prior complaints against Vanessa, each one dismissed without investigation. This wasn't just a bad apple. This was systemic. And tomorrow, it was going to start changing. Vanessa Taylor was about to find out exactly who owned Celestial Airways. What began as a quiet audit would soon become a reckoning, one long overdue. Have you ever seen someone realize they've made a catastrophic mistake in real time? The way their face shifts when the full weight of their actions hits them. If you believe in accountability for discriminatory behavior, type justice in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful world stories like this. Now, put yourself in Dominic's shoes. Would you reveal your identity the moment you boarded the plane, or wait and observe? Let's see how a determined father handled it. The first-class cabin of Celestial Airways Flight 892 from San Francisco to New York gleamed with polished finishes and luxury amenities. Vanessa Taylor moved confidently through her pre-flight routine, seatbelts, adjusting headrests, and smiling on cue. Her actions were automatic, perfected over 15 years of experience. She didn't notice anything unusual at first. 20 minutes before departure, the boarding chime echoed through the cabin. Vanessa straightened her uniform, smoothed her hair, and prepared for the steady stream of elite passengers. Then, she saw him. A tall, well-dressed black man stepped into the cabin, exuding quiet authority. His presence seemed familiar. She couldn't place it at first. "Good morning, sir. Welcome aboard," she said, scanning his boarding pass. "Mr. Wilson, you're in seat 1A. May I offer you a pre-flight beverage?" Dominic Wilson nodded. "Sparkling water, please. No ice." As she turned to prepare his drink, something odd caught her eye. Both the captain and co-pilot had stepped out of the cockpit, unusual during boarding. They walked straight to Mr. Wilson with evident respect. "Mr. Wilson," said Captain Bradley, extending a hand. "It's an honor to have you on board. If there's anything you need during the flight, don't hesitate to let us know." "Thank you, Captain," Dominic replied calmly. "I'm looking forward to a smooth flight." Vanessa froze. The captain knew him by name, and he knew the captain's name in return. Delivering the drink with a suddenly trembling hand, she hurried to the galley and pulled out her tablet. She needed to know who exactly was sitting in 1A. Dominic Wilson. Still, nothing jumped out until she saw it. Special status, VIP, priority flag. Her stomach sank. Her mind flashed back to the previous day's flight. The little black girl asking for a blanket. The woman with her calm but firm, and the moment. She noticed the interaction being recorded now. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Vanessa found herself stealing glances at Mr. Wilson. He was watching, not with hostility, but with focus, like someone assessing, calculating. It wasn't just business class scrutiny. It was personal. Suddenly, she remembered where she'd seen his face. The tech articles, the business magazines, the Forbes list. Dominic Wilson wasn't just a CEO. He was the owner of Celestial Airways, and yesterday, she had denied a blanket to his daughter. The cabin settled into a mid-flight lull. Meal trays were cleared, lights dimmed, and then, a soft chime rang out. Seat 1A. Dominic had pressed his call button. Another flight attendant responded. "I'd like to speak with the head flight attendant," Dominic said with polite gravity. The attendant nodded. "That would be Ms. Taylor. I'll get her for you right away." Vanessa felt her chest tighten as her colleague approached. She steadied herself, adjusted her posture, and walked slowly to 1A. "How can I help you, Mr. Wilson?" she asked. Voice tight but professional. Dominic looked up. Expression unreadable. "I'm conducting an anonymous audit of customer service standards across Celestial Airways," he said evenly. "Would you mind answering a few questions about your service approach?" Vanessa nodded stiffly. "Of course. Excellent. First, could you explain Celestial's official policy on blanket distribution?" The question hit like a gut punch. "Blankets are available to all passengers upon request, as supplies allow," she recited automatically. "Is there any official restriction that limits blankets to premium passengers only?" "No, sir," she admitted, voice barely steady. "There is not." "I see." Dominic leaned back slightly, his tone measured. "And in your 15 years with Celestial, would you say that all passengers are treated equally, regardless of appearance, age, or perceived economic status?" Vanessa hesitated. Her throat tightened. "We strive to provide excellent service to everyone." "That wasn't my question, Miss Taylor." Dominic's voice didn't rise, but it carried weight. "Do all passengers actually receive equal treatment?" The silence between them stretched. Finally, she spoke, barely above a whisper. "I believe there's always room for improvement." "Indeed," Dominic said, holding her gaze. "One final question." He paused. Vanessa could feel it coming. "Do you recall a young passenger on yesterday's flight from New York to San Francisco? A 6-year-old girl who requested a blanket." Her face went pale. It was over. The audit wasn't anonymous. It was personal. There are many passengers each day," she stammered, hoping to salvage something. Dominic didn't flinch. Instead, he turned his tablet toward her, playing the video Sandra had sent. Vanessa watched herself on screen, heard her own words, cold and dismissive. When the video ended, Dominic didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "I'll need your employee information for my report." "And Miss Taylor," he paused, letting the silence hang. "I wouldn't make any long-term career plans with Celestial Airways. If I were you." Vanessa backed away, legs unsteady, heart pounding. Only now did she grasp the full weight of what she had done, not just to a child, but to herself. Dominic Wilson wasn't just any passenger. Zoe wasn't just any little girl. And Celestial Airways, he owned it. ... Vanessa single quotes as complaints with form letters and no follow-up, part of a broader pattern of negligence and complicity that implicates not just a single flight attendant, but the leadership culture of this entire organization. Curtis Parker visibly blanched as his name appeared on the screen, along with snippets of email threads he had assumed were buried forever. Thomas Bradshaw shifted in his chair, his confident demeanor beginning to crack under the weight of the mounting evidence. Dominic continued, his voice even, but cutting through the silence like a scalpel. Celestial Airways claims to offer exceptional service to all passengers. But in truth, we've been delivering a segregated experience dressed up in luxury branding. That ends today. He turned slightly toward Vanessa, his expression unreadable. Miss Taylor, you are hereby suspended, pending the outcome of a full investigation. You will be given the opportunity to participate in a formal review process. But let me be clear. This isn't just about one employee. It's about an entire system that enabled and protected discriminatory behavior. Then, to the stunned room, effective immediately. Celestial Airways is implementing the following actions. A. Full external audit of all HR records and passenger complaints from the last 10 years. The formation of an independent ethics and equity board with the power to make personnel recommendations directly to me. Mandatory retraining and recertification for all customer-facing staff, from check-in to first class. And the resignation of any executive found to have obstructed, ignored, or condoned discriminatory practices. Gasps rippled through the room. Curtis Parker opened his mouth to protest, but Dominic raised a hand. Mr. Parker, I expect your resignation on my desk by close of business today. Your conduct has failed every standard of professional and moral responsibility. Dominic finally turned to Thomas Bradshaw. As for you, your tenure as Chief Operating Officer is over. You can either accept a transitional advisory role with no authority, or tender your resignation. Your legacy ends here, but mine is just beginning. Bradshaw's face turned red, his fists clenched on the table. But the authority in Dominic's voice brooked no challenge. Dominic stood. This meeting is adjourned. Some of you will not be invited back to the next one. As he walked out, executives sat in stunned silence, the air thick with the weight of accountability long deferred. Vanessa sat motionless, her mind racing not just with fear, but for the first time in her career, with clarity. What she had once seen as professionalism had been prejudice in disguise. And now, the price had come due. Outside the boardroom, Dominic paused to look out over the skyline, the city stretching far beneath him, flawed, vibrant, and worth fighting for. He pulled out his phone and tapped a message to his assistant. Schedule a press conference. We're going public with the reforms. He smiled slightly. This wasn't just the end of an era. It was the beginning of a reckoning, long overdue. The Taylor situation, as usual. Dominic read aloud from an internal HR memo. He turned to Curtis Parker. Mr. Parker, would you care to explain what as usual means in this context? Curtis's face had gone pale. It's standard procedure to review complaints for validity before launching formal investigations. He stammered. And your criteria for determining validity? Dominic pressed. We consider the source, alignment with company policies, and the potential for reputational harm, Curtis said, trailing off as he realized how damning his own words sounded. Vanessa Taylor's earlier confidence was rapidly disintegrating. She had always assumed her internal connections would protect her, just as they had in the past. But now, those same allies were silent, distancing themselves as she sat exposed under the harsh light of accountability. I've always followed the unofficial guidelines, she blurted, her voice defensive. Premium passengers receive priority. That's how it's always worked. Dominic raised an eyebrow. Unofficial guidelines. Interesting phrase. Who gave you these? Unofficial rules, Ms. Taylor. Vanessa shot a nervous glance at Thomas Bradshaw. It's just understood. Part of the company culture. Dominic turned his attention to Bradshaw. Mr. Bradshaw, as Chief Operations Officer, what are your thoughts on this understood culture? Bradshaw adjusted his tie and bought a moment of silence. Celestial Airways has always prided itself on delivering exceptional service. Sometimes, that requires making judgment calls about how to allocate resources. Based on what criteria? Dominic asked. Age, race, perceived economic status. Of course not, Bradshaw objected quickly. That would be inappropriate and illegal. Dominic clicked his remote, revealing an internal email on the screen. And yet, here's an email you sent 3 months ago to senior cabin staff. It reads, "Remember who pays our premium prices, and focus your attention accordingly. Would you care to explain what you meant?" Bradshaw flushed. That was about identifying frequent flyers, business travelers, people who might upgrade in the future, not discrimination. Dominic turned back to Vanessa. "Miss Taylor, in your experience, how was that guidance typically interpreted by staff?" Vanessa hesitated, then finally admitted, "We took it to mean, focus on passengers who looked like they belonged in first class." "And what does someone who belongs in first class look like, in your opinion?" Dominic asked quietly. The room went silent. Vanessa opened her mouth but said nothing. There was no safe answer. Dominic took a breath and then began again, his voice softer. "Let me tell you about my daughter. Zoe is 6 years old. She loves elephants, strawberry ice cream, and dance class. She's learning to read chapter books, and can already do multiplication. She's bright, compassionate, and endlessly curious." Then his tone hardened. "And yesterday, she learned that someone could look at her and decide she didn't deserve the same basic courtesy as a white man sitting across the aisle." He stood, his voice filling the room with quiet authority. "I'm one of the wealthiest men in the country. I own this airline and a dozen other companies. I've had dinner with presidents and prime ministers. And yet, none of that protected my black daughter from being dismissed as less deserving of a blanket." Around the table, executives shifted in their seats, eyes downcast. "I don't tell you this for sympathy," he continued, "but to underscore that what happened to Zoe wasn't about one flight or one employee. It's the result of a culture that tolerates, even rewards, treating people differently based on how they look." Vanessa, now visibly shaken, tried one last time to salvage her job. "Mr. Wilson, I'm truly sorry for the misunderstanding. If I had known she was your daughter," Dominic's voice snapped like a whip. "That's exactly the problem. You think a passenger's worthiness depends on who their parent is. That kind of thinking has no place here." Tears welled in Vanessa's eyes, but they were rooted in fear and self-preservation, not remorse. "Please," she whispered, "I've given 15 years to Celestial. I need this job." Dominic met her gaze coldly. "And in those 15 years, how many passengers have you made feel lesser? How many children have learned from you that they don't belong?" She had no answer. Thomas Bradshaw spoke up, trying to steer the conversation. "Dominic, we take this very seriously. Of course, we'll strengthen our training." "Perhaps a formal warning." Dominic let out a humorless laugh. "A warning. Mr. Bradshaw, let me make myself perfectly clear. Vanessa Taylor's employment ends today, and so does yours." The room went still. "You can't be serious," Bradshaw sputtered. "I built this airline, and you built it on a foundation of discrimination," Dominic replied. "A culture where employees understood they were expected to prioritize based on appearance. That ends now." He turned to the others in the room, effective immediately. "I'm initiating a complete overhaul of Celestial Airways policies, practices, and leadership. Curtis Parker, your resignation is due by close of business today. The rest of you have a decision to make. Adapt to the future, or leave with Bradshaw." As security escorted Vanessa from the building, her years of status and protection evaporated in a single meeting. Gathering her things under a guard's watchful eye, the weight of her downfall finally hit her. Not because she didn't see it coming, but because she'd never imagined she'd be held accountable. It was only now, sitting in her apartment, that the reality finally sank in for Vanessa Taylor. She had denied a blanket to the daughter of the man who owned the entire airline, but more damning than that, she had exposed the bias that had guided her decisions for years. Thomas Bradshaw's exit from Celestial Airways was less graceful. Red-faced and fuming, He stormed out of the boardroom, shouting threats of legal action and proclaiming his innocence. No one listened. Dominic Wilson had already shifted focus to the executives who remained. Celestial Airways will become a model for equity and inclusion in the airline industry, he declared, not because it's fashionable or politically correct, but because it's right. It's necessary, and yes, it's good business. The only question is whether you're willing to be part of that transformation. When the meeting concluded, Dominic stayed behind, alone in the boardroom, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. He thought of Zoe, he thought of Amanda, and he thought of the promise he'd made to build a world where his daughter wouldn't have to endure the indignities he'd once accepted as normal. Today was only the beginning of that promise coming to life. Outside the boardroom, whispers traveled quickly through Celestial's headquarters. Change was coming fast and without compromise. For some, it meant long overdue justice. For others, it was a threat to everything they had grown used to. But one thing was clear: the era of business as usual was over. Have you ever seen how quickly a private moment becomes a public reckoning? If you believe companies should be held accountable for discrimination, type accountability in the comments. If you've experienced or witnessed bias like this, hit the like button to show solidarity. Because in today's world, the question every company must answer is, when your values are tested in real time, will you pass or will you fail? Neither Dominic Wilson nor Sandra Johnson had released the video. It appeared to have come from another passenger, someone seated nearby, who had captured the incident from a different angle and decided the world needed to see it. Damage control meeting in 5, announced Isla Washington, Celestial's newly promoted chief communications officer, striding through the PR department at 42. Isla had been one of the few black executives at Celestial before Dominic's acquisition. Her talent had long gone overlooked by the old guard, but Dominic had seen her clearly from the start. "What's our messaging?" asked James Chen, her deputy, hurrying to keep up. "We acknowledge, we apologize. We act," Illa said firmly. "No deflection, no excuses." Inside the war room, 10 communication professionals sat around a table, wired on caffeine, faces lit by screens, showing live updates from every platform imaginable. "Here's where we stand," said Leela, the media. Lead: a video of a flight attendant denying a blanket to a black child while handing one to a white man has gone viral. Social media has identified the employee as Vanessa Taylor. Several outlets are reporting the child is Dominic Wilson's daughter, though we haven't confirmed that publicly. Stocks down 12% since the market opened, added the financial communications lead. Analysts are questioning leadership and company culture. Isla nodded grimly. "Prepare immediate statements. Coordinate with legal, and get Mr. Wilson ready if he decides to speak." Meanwhile, across town, Vanessa Taylor sat frozen on her couch, staring at her phone in disbelief. Her name, her face, they were everywhere. Almost every headline was some variation of racist flight attendant fired by Celestial Airways. Her social media accounts were flooded with angry messages. News vans were parked outside her apartment. She had cycled through panic, denial, and desperation all morning, calling former colleagues, most of whom now couldn't talk. Thomas Bradshaw wasn't answering, and her union representative had given her the grim truth. "With that video circulating, there's little basis for appeal. This isn't fair," Vanessa whispered into the silence. "I was just doing my job, the way they trained me." But even as she said it, she knew the words rang hollow. Her phone buzzed again, a text from her mother. "CNN is playing the video again. Call me." Vanessa turned off her phone instead, at Dominic Wilson's Manhattan penthouse. Another crisis was unfolding, one more personal. Sandra sat in the playroom with Zoe, carefully shielding her from the frenzy below. "Why are there so many people outside?" Zoe asked, peering out the window. "They're just doing their job." "Sweetheart," Sandra said gently, leading her away. How about we finish that puzzle we started yesterday? In his home office, Dominic was on a call with his executive team and outside crisis consultants. The pressure was mounting. The public is demanding to hear from you directly, said Rebecca Goldstein, the lead consultant. Your silence is being interpreted as corporate stonewalling. My priority is protecting my daughter's privacy, Dominic replied. She's 6. I won't use her to manage optics. With respect, Rebecca said carefully, the story is already public. If you don't speak, others will define the narrative for you. Dominic rubbed his temples. He was torn as a father, as a CEO, and as a black man who knew how easily the truth could get buried beneath spin. What about the employee? He asked. Vanessa Taylor, what's happening with her? She's receiving death threats, reported Isla. So is our corporate office. We've increased security. Death threats, over a blanket? Dominic asked, stunned. It's not just a blanket, Isla said softly. It's what the blanket represents. This has become a symbol for something much bigger. People are projecting their own experiences of discrimination onto it. Outside, the conversation kept growing and dividing. Some online commenters insisted Vanessa was just following company norms. Others argued that her actions reflected systemic discrimination in customer service, so deeply embedded that it often went unrecognized until now. Rival Airline saw an opening. Delta released a statement reaffirming their commitment to equal treatment for all passengers. United Airlines announced a surprise review of their own in-flight service protocols. Celestial Airways' reckoning had arrived, and the entire industry was watching. American Airlines capitalized on the controversy with a limited-time promotion, blankets for everyone, regardless of ticket class. Meanwhile, inside the Wilson penthouse, Sandra's phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, morning shows, evening news, podcasts. Everyone wanted to speak with the nanny, who had stood up for her young charge. Most troubling were the inquiries, coming through her personal email and social profiles. How did they even find me? She muttered. I'm not doing any interviews, she told Dominic firmly. My job is to protect Zoe, not become a public figure. Dominic nodded, grateful. Thank you. I don't know what we'd do without you. That evening, after putting Zoe to bed, Dominic and Sandra reviewed the day's developments. The company's stock has stabilized, Dominic said. Our public statement, acknowledging the incident and announcing immediate reforms, seems to have helped. And Vanessa Taylor? Sandra asked quietly. She was terminated, Dominic replied, along with several executives who enabled the culture that allowed this to happen. Sandra studied him closely. You know this isn't just about one flight attendant, or even one airline, right? This is about deeply ingrained patterns most people don't even see until they're forced to. I know, Dominic said, sighing. And that's what makes it so hard to fix. How do you fight a problem that so many refuse to admit exists? You start by using your voice, Sandra said simply. You have a platform. Most people don't. Their conversation was interrupted by Zoe, padding into the room in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed elephant. I had a bad dream, she whispered, climbing into her father's lap. The lady on the plane came back and took Ellie away. Dominic held his daughter close, rage and sorrow swelling inside him. This was the real cost of discrimination, not stock prices or media fallout, but the safety stolen from a child. No one will ever take anything from you, he promised, kissing her forehead. And tomorrow, I'm going to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to any other child. After tucking Zoe back into bed, Dominic made his decision. He called Rebecca Goldstein. Set up the interview, he said. National morning show, live segment, but on my terms. No exploitation of Zoe, no images of her, without my approval. This isn't about sympathy, it's about systemic change. He stood by the window, looking out at the glittering New York skyline. Somewhere out there, thousands of parents were having hard conversations with their children, conversations he'd never wanted to have with his own. Unlike them, he had the power to make a difference. And he would. The interview. The ABC studio buzzed, with pre-show energy, makeup artists, producers, camera operators prepping for the day's biggest segment. Dominic Wilson sat in the guest chair, microphone clipped, expression calm but resolute. "We're live in 60 seconds, the floor director called. Across the country, millions tuned in. Joining us exclusively this morning is Dominic Wilson, tech billionaire and owner of Celestial Airways, speaking for the first time about the now viral video involving his daughter and a flight attendant accused of racial discrimination. Mr. Wilson, thank you for being here." "Thank you for having me," Dominic said evenly. "Let's start with the video," the host began. "It shows your 6-year-old daughter being denied a blanket, while a white passenger received one shortly after. What was your initial reaction?" "My first reaction was as a father," Dominic said. "Pain that my daughter had experienced rejection because of how she looks. Anger that someone made her feel lesser." He paused, then continued. "My second reaction was, as a business leader, recognizing that this wasn't an isolated incident. It reflects deeper, systemic issues. You've since taken swift action, terminating the employee and several executives. Some call that an overreaction to a single event. Your thoughts?" "This was not a single incident," Dominic replied. "Our internal investigation revealed repeated reports of discriminatory behavior ignored by leadership. What happened to my daughter was simply the most visible symptom of a much larger problem." Throughout the interview, Dominic balanced vulnerability and leadership. He shared personal stories. "I've been followed by security in my own office building. I've been asked for extra ID while using a premium credit card. People assume I'm the assistant at functions I'm hosting. This happens to people of color across America every day. The difference this time, it was caught on camera. It happened to the child of someone with the power to force accountability." In a small apartment in Queens, Vanessa Taylor watched the segment, her stomach churning, hearing directly from Dominic for the first time. She saw how her previous defenses now sounded hollow and self-serving. "What do you say to those who insist this was just about service, not race?" the host asked. "I'd ask them to re-watch the video," Dominic replied. "Watch how quickly the same blanket that was only for premium passengers became available when requested by a white man. Watch the change in tone, the difference in respect. To some, it may seem subtle, but to us, it's unmistakable." In the Wilson penthouse, Zoe watched her father on TV, cross-legged with Sandra beside her. "Daddy looks serious," she observed. "He's talking about something important," Sandra said. "He's trying to make sure other kids don't feel like you did on the plane." Zoe nodded, hugging her stuffed elephant. "He's being a superhero," she said simply. A call to action. The interview turned to Sandra's role. "Your daughter's nanny, Sandra Johnson, has declined interviews," the host noted. "But she played a crucial role in documenting what happened. Can you speak about her?" "Absolutely," Dominic said. "Sandra was my wife's best friend and has been Zoe's second mother since birth. Like so many black caregivers, she's had to prepare my daughter for realities no child should face, explaining why we're followed in stores, why people move away from us on the subway. Children notice these things even if adults pretend they don't." A pre-recorded clip from Sandra played briefly. "No 6-year-old should have to understand racism," she said quietly. "But black children often don't have the luxury of ignorance." Finally, Dominic addressed what's next. "We're overhauling Celestial Airways' new training, anonymous service audits, accountability at every level, and we're creating a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in aviation." He leaned forward with quiet intensity. "But this isn't just about Celestial. I'm calling on other industry leaders, airlines, hotels, retail, tech, and anywhere customer service is impacted by bias. It's time to face it head on. My money and status couldn't shield my daughter, but they can fuel meaningful change. Things were handled on the job, and I never questioned it until now. The room was quiet for a moment, not out of judgment, but understanding. Darnell nodded slowly. That's the first step, he said, owning your part without hiding behind excuses. Vanessa exhaled, as if she'd been holding her breath for weeks. The defensiveness that had shielded her from shame was giving way to something more vulnerable and, potentially, more powerful. I don't know if I can fix what I did, she said quietly. But I don't want to be the person who did it, and walked away unchanged. A week later, Vanessa began volunteering with a local nonprofit that provided diversity education in schools. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't erase the past, but it was something. When a group of third graders asked her what she used to do, she hesitated, then answered honestly, I used to work for an airline, but I made a mistake. Now I'm trying to learn and help others learn too. That night, she wrote in her training journal, Today I felt useful again, not in the way I used to define success, but in a way that made me feel human. Accountability isn't just about punishment. It's about transformation. Meanwhile, Dominic's advocacy gained momentum. His interview continued to spark national discussion. Op-eds debated the role of unconscious bias in customer service. HR departments began revising training protocols. More airline CEOs publicly committed to transparency and inclusion efforts. Within a month, a coalition of major U.S. airlines announced a joint initiative to combat discrimination in aviation. Dominic, though still grieving what his daughter had endured, found comfort in knowing that what began with pain had led to meaningful change. Sandra remained by Zoe's side, steady, fierce, loving. She turned down every media offer, content to do the real work of raising a child in a complicated world with grace and clarity. One evening, while reading Zoe a bedtime story, Sandra paused and asked, Do you know how brave you are? Zoe nodded, solemnly, because I told the truth. Yes, Sandra smiled, and because you helped show the world that everyone deserves kindness. Zoe beamed, like a superhero. Exactly, Sandra whispered, tucking the blanket around her, just like a superhero. Outside, the city lights continued to shimmer, and inside that small, deeply human story of harm, truth, accountability, and change, a new kind of legacy was being written. One where justice didn't end with punishment, but began with understanding. Systemic racism doesn't need a rulebook, Darnell observed. It's baked into the environment. We just learn to breathe it in without questioning it. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa's perspective began to shift, not suddenly, but with steady momentum. What had begun as a mandatory community service assignment at a local center in a predominantly black neighborhood turned into something more meaningful. There, she formed a friendship with Letitia Coleman, a kindergarten teacher who answered Vanessa's questions with both candor and compassion. I'm not a search engine for white folks, Letitia teased one afternoon when Vanessa's questions came rapid fire. But I appreciate you actually wanting to understand. 3 months after the incident, Vanessa sat before her computer, staring at a blank email addressed to Dominic Wilson. She had obtained his business contact after multiple requests to his assistant. The subject line read, A genuine apology and request. Composing the message had taken hours, writing, deleting, rewriting. Every sentence was weighed for sincerity, stripped of defensiveness, and reshaped to reflect honest self-examination. Mr. Wilson, I'm writing to offer my sincere apology to you, and especially to your daughter, Zoe, for my discriminatory behavior on Flight 237. What I did was harmful, injustifiable, and rooted in biases I am only now beginning to truly understand. The months since have forced me into a deep process of through mandated sensitivity training, participation in support groups, and involvement in the community. I've come to see that what happened wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a broader pattern, one I was blind to because it had been normalized in both my work environment and my upbringing. This is not an excuse. It is context for the hard lessons I'm learning. I now understand how deeply that moment on the plane could have affected Zoe. Children, I've learned, need both mirrors and windows, mirrors to see themselves reflected with dignity, and windows to understand others' experiences. That day, I gave your daughter a distorted mirror, one that suggested she was less deserving of care. The shame of that weighs heavily on me. I don't expect or ask for forgiveness, but I wanted you to know your response to that day, the grace, the advocacy, the courage has led to real change, not only in corporate policy, but in individuals like me. I've attached an application to your new training program. I understand if my inclusion would be unwelcome. Still, I believe my experience and my growth could be useful in helping others recognize their own biases before they cause harm. Whatever your decision, please know I remain committed to this work. Accountability, I've come to learn, is a lifelong process, with regret and with gratitude for what you've taught me, Vanessa Taylor. Her finger hovered over the send button for a long moment before she finally clicked it. The email vanished into the digital void, its impact unknown. That evening, Vanessa attended her support group with a lighter heart. For the first time since the incident, she didn't speak solely from a place of shame. She spoke from a place of purpose. I sent a letter today, she told the group. I don't know if it will change anything for the person who reads it, but writing it changed something in me. As she spoke, her phone buzzed. She ignored it until after the meeting. At the bus stop, she finally looked. The subject line, read, a genuine apology and request from Dominic Wilson, 6 months after the blanket incident. Celestial Airways had undergone a transformation. The once corporate and sterile lobby now featured a large wall display of the company's new core values: equity, respect, inclusion, community, accountability. Each principle was illustrated not with stock photos, but real images of employees, embodying those values in action. Dominic Wilson stood in front of the wall, leading a group of industry journalists on a tour. These aren't just buzzwords, he explained. They're standards, ones we're accountable to at every level. The changes were not superficial. Celestial had implemented new training protocols, especially in customer-facing roles. Anonymous testers flew on random flights, providing unfiltered feedback that shaped staff evaluations and company policy. Leadership had also been restructured. Thomas Bradshaw and his senior team were gone, replaced by a diverse executive board. Sandra Johnson, who had supported Zoe through that difficult flight, was now Celestial's chief customer experience officer. We're no longer waiting for complaints, Sandra told the press. We're proactively designing systems that create equitable, dignified experiences for every passenger. In the airline's design studio, 6-year-old Zoe sat at a kid-sized desk, surrounded by drawings. She had become an unlikely consultant for Celestial's new Sky Friends amenity, kidda, children's comfort, and entertainment package available on all flights, regardless of ticket class. I think every kid should get a blanket if they're cold, Zoe told the designers earnestly. And the blankets should have stars because we're flying close to the sky. The team smiled and took notes. From the doorway, Dominic watched his daughter, pride softening his features. The incident that had once broken his heart had sparked something larger than any one family. It had helped reshape an industry. An assistant appeared at his side. Your next meeting is ready. Dominic nodded and stepped into a nearby boardroom. Inside, Vanessa Taylor sat waiting. Her appearance had changed, less rigid, more natural. Her demeanor was no longer defensive, but quietly humble. Ms. Taylor, Dominic greeted her, extending a hand. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the opportunity, she replied. her voice steady, despite her nerves. Dominic took a seat across from her. Your application to the program was unexpected. The review committee had mixed feelings, as you might imagine. But your letter and the recommendations from your community supervisors stood out. Vanessa nodded. I understand the hesitation. If our roles were reversed, I'm not sure I'd trust me either. Trust is earned, Dominic said. That's why I wanted to meet with you personally before making a decision. A soft knock interrupted them. Sandra entered, holding Zoe's hand. You asked us to join you. Sandra's voice was calm, but her eyes held a quiet edge of protectiveness as she recognized Vanessa. Yes, Dominic confirmed, then turned to his daughter. Zoe, do you remember Miss Taylor from our flight? Zoe studied Vanessa with the frank curiosity only children possess, and tainted by adult hesitation. You're the lady who wouldn't give me a blanket, she said simply. Vanessa felt a sting behind her eyes. Yes, she replied softly. I am, and I'm very sorry for how I treated you. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right. Why did you do it? Zoe asked, voicing the question so many adults were afraid to. Vanessa drew in a breath. I made a mistake, she admitted. I treated you differently because of how you look, and that was wrong. Everyone deserves kindness and respect, no matter what. Zoe nodded thoughtfully. My teacher says when we do something wrong, we should say sorry and try to do better next time. Your teacher is very wise, Vanessa said with a faint smile. That's exactly what I'm trying to do now. Sandra, ever the protector, broke in. The question, she said, looking directly at Vanessa, is whether that effort is sincere or just a way to rebuild your image. It was a fair challenge. Vanessa didn't look away. 6 months ago, I would have said whatever I thought you wanted to hear just to save my job, but that's not what this is. I'm not here to ask for my old position. I'm asking for a chance to help others avoid the same mistakes I made. The change in me is real, but I understand why you might doubt that, Dominic observed quietly. Vanessa has applied to join the development team for our new training program, he explained. Her proposal focuses on identifying how bias operates in customer service settings. The question is whether it's appropriate for her to play that role, given the history. Zoe, who had been listening intently, chimed in with the simple clarity of a child. In my book, the dragon who is mean turns good and helps the knights protect the village instead of burning it. The adults paused, sharing a glance at the unexpected wisdom. Sometimes, Dominic said gently, people who've made mistakes have insights that can help prevent those same mistakes in others. But it's also important that everyone feels safe and respected in the process. Sandra looked at Vanessa for a long, quiet moment. I believe in second chances, she said at last, but with clear expectations and accountability. 2 weeks later, Vanessa Taylor stood at the front of a training room filled with new Celestial Airways flight attendants. She wore professional attire, not a uniform, her badge reading, Training Consultant. My name is Vanessa Taylor, she began, and I'm here to share a difficult story about bias, accountability, and the journey toward real change. The room listened, rapt, as Vanessa recounted her experience. Her story, raw and honest, held more power than any scripted training video. She didn't minimize what she'd done. She used it truthfully, to illuminate what others might not yet see in themselves. Across town, a different event was underway. At Celestial's main terminal, the airline was launching its new Sky Friends program with a ceremonial first flight. Children from across the city, representing a wide range of backgrounds, were invited to participate. At the center of it all was Zoe Wilson, proudly wearing a miniature flight director's uniform. Dominic watched with pride as his daughter handed out star-patterned blankets to each boarding child. Everyone gets one, Zoe told the press with unwavering seriousness, because everyone deserves to be warm and comfortable when they fly, no matter what. Media coverage was extensive. Industry leaders took notice. What had once been a PR crisis had become a model for ethical transformation. Celestial Airways soon received a major award recognizing its bold new approach to corporate culture. "We're just getting started," Dominic told reporters. "Real change doesn't happen in months. It happens through years of consistent effort and sustained accountability." At the training center, Vanessa found unexpected purpose. She no longer hid from her past. She used it with every class. She helped employees recognize how bias can quietly embed itself in standard procedures. What happened to Zoe Wilson wasn't just about one bad decision, she would say. It was about assumptions, systems, and habits that had gone unchecked. "For too long. My journey isn't about redemption, it's about responsibility." Celestial's transformation rippled throughout the industry. The airline's operations were rebuilt from the inside out. Hiring practices prioritized diversity. Customer satisfaction rose across demographics. Employee retention improved as team members reported feeling more respected and aligned with the company's mission. 6 months later, at Celestial's annual company event, staff gathered to celebrate their shared progress. The highlight, the unveiling of Equal Dignity, new industry-wide standard for equitable customer service. Celestial wasn't just using it internally, they were offering it freely to other airlines, inviting collective progress. During the ceremony, flight attendants showcased a reimagined boarding process. Once again, Zoe took part passing out blankets to children representing the diversity of the passengers they now served. "When I grow up," she said proudly to her father, "I want to be the boss of the sky like you." Dominic smiled and scooped her into his arms. "You can be anything you want, sweetheart. And because of you, the sky might just be a kinder place for everyone." As the applause faded, Dominic stepped to the podium. He looked out over the crowd now, a far more diverse and unified group than just half a year earlier. Among them stood Vanessa Taylor, no longer defined by her mistake, but by her unwavering commitment to growth. Nearby stood Sandra Johnson, whose steady courage had not only changed a company but had inspired a movement. Together, they embodied what's possible when injustice is confronted head-on, when accountability leads to transformation, when a painful incident becomes the catalyst for a more just, compassionate world. One flight. One interaction. One blanket at a time. This story reminds us, discrimination doesn't always look loud or obvious. Often, it hides in routines, policies, and assumptions left unexamined. Power and privilege can shield some and expose others. But transformation is possible. Not through optics, through truth, through hard conversations, through accountability that doesn't end with punishment, but begins with growth. The journey shows that real change requires looking inward, acknowledging harm, and doing the work. In Zoe's blanket, it became a symbol of what happens when empathy takes flight. This story reminds us that redemption isn't about erasing past mistakes. It's about using them to prevent future harm. Vanessa's journey shows that growth is possible when we confront our biases honestly and commit to lasting change. Most importantly, it highlights how children like Zoe not only experience the painful effects of discrimination, but also hold profound truths about fairness that adults often forget. Their simple, clear sense of justice can guide us toward solutions that are not just equitable, but deeply human. Change is possible when leaders are brave enough to face uncomfortable truths. When companies move beyond symbolic gestures to implement real systemic reform, and when all of us listen to the voices too often left unheard, true justice doesn't stop at punishment, it fosters transformation, and transformation lifts everyone.